Noam Chomsky. You've probably heard the name, right? But who is he, really? Is he the brilliant scientist who totally changed how we think about the human mind? Or is he this political firebrand who is always challenging the powerful? Well, today we're going to try and unravel the whole paradox of one of the most complicated intellectual figures of our time. So first, let's just get a sense of the scale here. Chomsky isn't just influential, he's one of the most cited scholars alive. We're talking up there with historical giants like Marx and Shakespeare. And his output? It's just staggering. The man has written over 150 books on basically everything, from how language works to the very structure of global power. And this is the central puzzle of Noam Chomsky. How can a scholar who is so fundamental to entire fields of study also be one of the most controversial public figures out there? Why is the same guy celebrated in universities but, condemned in the halls of power? That's the big question we're digging into today. Well, the key to solving that puzzle is realizing you're not really dealing with one person. You're dealing with two huge and what seem like totally separate legacies. You've got Chomsky the scientist, and then you've got Chomsky the political dissident. Let's break this down. And this divide, it is stark. On one side, you have this academic titan, right? The father of modern linguistics who helped kick off the cognitive revolution. He's a celebrated, tenured pillar of the intellectual establishment. And then, on the other side, you have the activist. A fierce, relentless critic of state and corporate power, a guy who is often hated by that exact same establishment. If you want to get Chomsky, you've got to understand both of these identities. So let's start with that first pillar, his revolutionary work in linguistics. Because before Chomsky came along, the way we understood language was completely different. You see, when Chomsky entered the scene, the big theory was something called behaviorism, championed by B.F. Skinner. The idea was pretty simple. We're all born as blank slates, and we learn language just like a parrot does, by mimicking what we hear and getting a reward for it. Well, Chomsky just blew this idea completely out of the water. He argued that language isn't learned. It's an innate, biological thing we're all born with. His big theory to explain this is called universal grammar. And honestly, the best way to think about it is like a computer's operating system. Your laptop comes with an OS pre-installed, right? And that allows it to run pretty much any software you want. Well, Chomsky argued the human brain comes with a language OS already installed. This thing contains the basic rules common to all human languages, which lets a kid then learn any specific software like English or Japanese or Swahili. So what's the evidence for this wild idea? Well, it's all around us, and how kids learn to talk. First, the sentences kids come up with are way more complex than the messy, broken stuff they actually hear from adults. Second, they learn it ridiculously fast. And third, they make these creative mistakes, like saying, I gooed instead of I went. No adult says I gooed. This is a dead giveaway that they aren't just copying. They're applying some kind of internal, unspoken rules. Something innate has to be guiding them. Now, this idea that a creative, rule-generating ability is hardwired into every single human isn't just some dusty academic theory. For Chomsky, it's the absolute foundation of his political philosophy. And that brings us to the second Chomsky, the political dissident. This is where his story gets really controversial. His political identity? He calls himself an anarcho-syndicalist, or a libertarian socialist. Okay, those are some big words, but the core idea is pretty simple. A deep skepticism of concentrated authoritarian power. And for Chomsky, that goes for an overreaching government just as much as it goes for a massive corporation. He believes in a society organized from the ground up, with direct democratic control by communities and workers. Maybe his most famous political idea is what he called the propaganda model, which he laid out in his book, Manufacturing Consent. The argument is this. In a democracy, you don't need obvious censorship to control what people think. Instead, the media system itself has a series of built-in filters that just naturally shape the news to favor the interests of the government and corporate elites. So, how does this work? He and his co-author proposed 5 of these filters. First up, ownership. Most major media outlets are massive corporations owned by very wealthy people. Second, advertising. The real money comes from advertisers, so you're not going to run content that makes your sponsors angry. Third, sourcing. The media gets most of its information from official, government, and business sources, which automatically frames the whole debate. Fourth, flack. If a story does challenge powerful interests, they get hit with organized criticism and pressure. And finally, anti-ideology. You create a common enemy, communists, terrorists, whatever, to rally everyone together and keep them in line. So what drives this constant, relentless critique of his? This quote from a famous essay he wrote back in 1967 really gets to the heart of it. For Chomsky, if you're an intellectual, you have a moral duty. Because you have privilege and access to information, you have an obligation to challenge power and expose injustice, no matter what it costs you personally. This one idea has pretty much defined his entire public life for over 60 years. Okay, so we have the two pieces, the revolutionary scientist and the radical dissident. Now let's try to bring them together to understand why he's still such an influential and, at the very same time, a deeply divisive figure. This timeline really shows you the parallel tracks of his career. I mean, look, in 1957, he publishes the book that completely flips linguistics on its head. Just 10 years later, he's one of the most famous intellectual opponents of the Vietnam War. From the very beginning, his groundbreaking academic work and his radical political work have been running side by side. And the reactions to all this work, well, they could not be more polarized. In the academic world, he's praised as the father of modern linguistics. For activists around the globe, he's a moral hero. But for his critics, he's been accused of everything from anti-Americanism to being an apologist for brutal regimes like the Khmer Rouge. And one of the most intense fights has always been around his uncompromising defense of free speech. Yeah, a huge source of the controversy is his absolutist, no-exceptions stance on freedom of speech. During something called the Farrison Affair, Chomsky defended the right of a French academic to publish books that denied the Holocaust. Now, Chomsky's position wasn't that the ideas were valid, he finds them disgusting, but that the principle of free speech means you have to defend it for everyone, especially for the views you hate the most. For a lot of people, that was just a step too far. And through it all, his productivity has just never stopped. Over 150 books. It's a testament to a life spent thinking, writing, and agitating, just relentlessly chasing both scientific truth and what he sees as political justice. So we're left with this final question. Scientist or agitator? Is he the man who changed how we understand the human mind, or the man who challenged the world's most powerful institutions? The truth is, he is, indivisibly, both. And the real question his legacy leaves us with is how, or maybe even if, those two monumental identities can ever truly be reconciled.